Today, we're digging into the rubble of one of history's most shocking architectural failures. It's a story about a total disaster that, and you're not going to believe this, actually made today's incredible skylines possible. So let's get into it. Okay, picture this. It's the morning of July 14th, 1902. You're in Venice, looking at the famous bell tower of St. Mark's Basilica, a landmark that stood for 1,000 years. And then, without warning, it doesn't just fall over. It literally disintegrates into a giant pyramid of bricks and dust, right there in the middle of the piazza. Just gone. The whole world was just stunned. I mean, there was no earthquake, no explosion, nothing. So what in the world happened? Well, the answer is hidden in a really fundamental problem that engineers just hadn't solved yet: the tricky physics of being tall and thin. To really get the solution, we first have to understand the victim. What could possibly bring an ancient giant like this to its knees? So this wasn't some sudden freak accident. Nope. For centuries, this 98-meter-tall tower was being slowly, silently weakened by what we call cumulative stress. You know, the constant pounding from wind, rain, and, oh yeah, the immense weight of 5 massive bells swinging around up top. It was basically a slow-motion failure that was just waiting to happen. The tower's collapse was a really brutal lesson in a problem that had been bugging engineers forever. The fact that tall, thin things, well, they just don't like to stay up. You see, building something tall and wide, think of the pyramids, that was a piece of cake. Ancient engineers had that totally figured out. A wide base is naturally stable, but building tall and thin? That is a completely different beast. The taller and skinnier you go, the more the whole thing wants to topple over. It was a puzzle that stumped builders for centuries. And this brings us to the absolute key concept for today, the slenderness ratio. It sounds complicated, but it's not. It's just a simple number you get by dividing a building's height by its base width. And believe it or not, this one little ratio is the ultimate predictor of whether a tower is going to stand tall or fall down. And here it is, the magic number that engineers used to fear: 5-to-1. Once a tower gets more than 5 times taller than it is wide, it crosses this really dangerous line. A line where forces like the wind can become absolutely catastrophic. And guess what? The Campanile was teetering right on that perilous edge. So why is that ratio so dangerous? Well, it's because a skinny tower acts just like a giant lever. When the wind pushes against the top, that force gets massively amplified down at the base, creating this intense pushing and pulling. And old brick towers, they just weren't built to handle that kind of stretching, that tension. And you know what? It actually gets worse. As wind flows past a tall building, it doesn't just push. It creates these little swirling pockets of low pressure on the other side. They're called vortices. And these things form on one side, then the other, pulling the building back and forth, rocking it in a rhythm that can be just devastating. So the disaster in Venice was this huge wake-up call. But the puzzle of building tall and thin wouldn't really be solved for another 60 years, during a skyscraper boom over in Chicago. The person who finally cracked the code was this brilliant structural engineer named Fazlur Khan. He was working in the 1960s, and he looked at this whole wind and slenderness problem and came up with a completely revolutionary way to think about how a skyscraper should be built. People called his idea a brilliantly simple solution, and it wasn't an exaggeration. It completely changed the game. It sparked a genuine renaissance in how we build skyscrapers. So what was Khan's big idea? It's called the braced tube. Instead of relying on a clunky internal skeleton to hold everything up, he realized you could turn the building's exterior into a super strong hollow tube. By adding these huge diagonal braces, trusses, to the outside walls, the entire building acts like one solid structure to fight off the wind. So here's the real difference, right? Old towers like the Campanile were basically just a pile of bricks, really weak against any twisting or bending. But Khan's braced tube, totally different. Those diagonals grab the wind's force and channel it safely all the way down to the foundation. This gives the skyscraper the muscle it needs to resist being shoved side to side. Khan's tube concept just opened the floodgates. Once they had this new tool, architects started getting even more creative, finding clever new ways to tame, or as they like to say, confuse the wind. Today, architects have a whole bag of tricks. They'll taper buildings so they get skinnier at the top where winds are fastest. They'll soften the corners or cut them off to break up those dangerous vortices. They even build giant holes right through the middle of buildings to let the wind pass through. And you just have to look at the results. Remember, The Campanile failed at a ratio of about 5 to 1. Well, today, we have structures like the Tokyo Skytree standing perfectly safe and stable at a mind-boggling 9 to 1 ratio. That is a massive leap in what's possible, and it's all thanks to the lessons learned from that pile of dust in Venice. I mean, take the world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa. You know that iconic spiral shape? That's not just for looks. Each one of those setbacks changes the building's shape, and that literally confuses the wind, preventing those powerful rhythmic vortices from getting organized and shaking the whole tower apart. And for the really tall, really skinny skyscrapers, there's one more secret weapon hiding inside: the tuned mass damper. It's this enormous weight, sometimes a giant steel ball that weighs hundreds of tons, just hanging near the top. So as the tower sways one way, this massive pendulum swings the other, acting like a giant shock absorber and canceling out the motion. It's so cool. So you see, reaching for the sky was never just about building higher. The real challenge, the one that Venice taught us the hard way, was about mastering all those invisible forces, the wind, the physics, that are constantly trying to knock our creations down. The lessons from that collapse in 1902 led directly to the wild, super skinny skyscrapers we see today, some pushing ratios of 15 to 1. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Just how thin can we possibly go? And where's the new breaking point?